The paperwork said I was an observer. The clerk had me as a supplemental observer for the Advanced Materials Recovery and Ordnance Disassembly program. I noticed the error on the third day. By then, my temporary access badge had been stamped, my locker assignment was logged, and the academic registrar's office was closed for a planetary alignment ceremony that ran, apparently, 11 days. So I stayed. The program coordinator, a Kel Sorvani named Instructor Warden Preth Valdek, had 6 jointed arms and a resonance crest along his skull that hummed a low, even tone when he was thinking. He had looked at my intake form, looked at me, looked at the form again, and then filed a notation that said, "Placement review pending." He put me in Bay 4. Bay 4 was a decommissioned mid-bulk hull section, roughly 18 meters end to end, full of live drive components and 3 classes of ordnance that the Academy categorized as intermediate, meaning a cadet who made the wrong cut in the wrong sequence would lose the hand. The 9-hour standard existed because that was how long it took the program's top graduates to work an intermediate hull section safely and completely, logging yield, flagging hazards, and filing an inspection request that the assessment AI could sign off on. I had been doing this for 23 years. I had started at 24, on the mineral belts in the contested outer rim, where you didn't get 9 hours. You got whatever window the salvage claim held before the next crew's proximity alarm brought their drones in. You worked fast or you worked for someone else's yield report. I had worked fast. I had been working fast so long that fast had stopped feeling like anything in particular. It was just the pace. The assessment yard was a pressurized open-air annex behind the Academy's main fabrication block. 6 bays, 6 hull sections, 6 sets of senior cadets watching each other from across the dividing barriers, with the specific competitive tension of people who know their ranking is posted on a shared display. The top-ranked cadet in the program was a Kel Sorvani named Veth Osaran, long-limbed, crystalline crest, throwing a faint harmonic that sat about 3 tones higher than Preth Valdek's. He had 6 program records. The display said so. He looked at me once, during the briefing, when Preth Valdek mentioned that Bay 4's supplemental observer had been placed on active assessment status due to an administrative error. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. At 0630, the Bay seals dropped and the cadets went in. I went in. The hull section in Bay 4 was a Kelvarathi mid-bulk freighter, secondary drive class, portside fuel manifold still pressurized. I could smell the fuel compound through my suit's intake filter, not the compound itself, but the way it reacted to the metal fatigue in the manifold housing, a specific sharpness that meant the housing had been running hot for a long time before decommission. The cadets across the dividing barrier in Bay 3 were already consulting their schematics, their data tablets out, their methodology unfolding in careful, annotated steps. Always. On a Kelvarathi secondary drive, the manifold runs underneath the primary coupling housing, which means if you go primary coupling first and the manifold is under pressure, you are working with a live fuse behind your left shoulder. Nobody in a classroom teaches you that. You learn it from the third time you almost lose your left shoulder. Then the ordnance access panel, which on this model was mismarked. The Academy schematics had it on the starboard lower, but the Kelvarathi ship designers had run an interior variance on this production series and moved it to the portside mid. I had seen that variance 7 times. I went portside mid. The ordnance canisters were seated in a compression array, 3 intermediate class, 2 low class misfiled as intermediate on the Academy's inventory list, 1 high class that the Academy's own pre-assessment team had tagged as intermediate. That last one I set aside and flagged with a physical marker before I touched anything else. I wrote the flag notation in longhand on the tag because I didn't know if Dreneth's assessment AI could read Earth Standard script, and I wanted a human-readable record. Then the extraction sequence. Then the yield logging. I had a portable scale in my tool bag. My own, not the Academy's. Because in the field you calibrate your own instruments. The Academy's Bay scales were accurate to within 1%. Mine were accurate to within 4 decimal points. The difference matters when the yield report is what your licensing renewal hangs on. I weighed every component. I logged the manifold alloy grade, the coupling housing metal composition, the ordnance canister serial codes. The 2 misfiled low-class canisters I flagged separately with their correct classification. The high-class unit I flagged with a full incident notation, including the production run number from the stamping on the base, which matched a recall advisory that had been circulating in the Deep Salvage Licensing Board's internal bulletins for the past 6 years. Then I filed the inspection request. The time was 07:10, 40 minutes. The assessment AI took 11 minutes to process the request. In Bay 3, the cadets were still in their methodology phase, data tablets running, hazard annotations going up on the shared schematic display. In Bay 1, Vethosaran had his drive components staged in a sequence I recognized as textbook clean. He was fast. He was probably going to finish in 6 hours. That was genuinely good. The assessment AI filed its response at 07:21. The yield report exceeded rubric ceiling on component grade classification. My portable scales readings were more granular than the Bay's assessment protocols were designed to record. The ordnance reclassification flags triggered an automatic incident review. The high-class canister notation generated a secondary safety review that pulled in a different department entirely, and the inspection request itself came back stamped complete, full yield, with a notation underneath that said, supplemental review required, placement status unclear. Prith Valdek came into the Bay at 07:24. His crest ran a tone I hadn't heard from him before, lower than his thinking tone, slower. He looked at the staged components. He looked at the flagged canisters. He looked at the high-class unit with my handwritten notation taped to its base. He picked up the notation, read it, set it back down. He said, "You identified the recall advisory." He said he would look into that. He didn't ask me anything else. He walked back out of the bay and stood at the edge of the yard for a long time, looking at nothing I could identify. His crest ran that slow, low tone the whole time. I packed my tool bag. I cleaned the bay. That is habit, not requirement. You leave a work site the way you found it. Or cleaner. My father taught me that on the first derelict we ever worked together, when I was 11 years old, and thought the point of salvage was the yield. The placement review notation on my file had been updated overnight. The administrative error had been corrected. My credentials had been forwarded to the Deep Salvage Licensing Board, under the correct intake code. My access badge was flagged for deactivation at end of day. They were sending me home. I walked back through the assessment yard on my way to the locker room. The other bays were still running. It was barely mid-morning, and the cadets had hours left in their trials. In Bay 1, I could see Vetho Sarin working the ordnance access panel. He had found the portside mid-variance on his own. He had not needed anyone to show him. He looked up as I passed. His crest went quiet. Not the contempt tone, not the competitive sharpness. Something I did not have a name for, in his register or mine. I nodded. He did not respond, and I did not expect him to. I collected my tool bag from the locker, handed in my access badge at the front desk, and walked out through the main fabrication block into the open air. The licensing board's offices were 40 minutes by transit. My field flask was still half full. The work had been the same as it always was. That was enough.